Today we're bringing stakeholders from the Solano County children and youth community together to prioritize some policy and budget issues that we can take to our elected officials to advocate for additional funding or other resources for the top priorities. We have a good cross-section of the community. So we have youth leaders from all parts of our county. We have parents and parent advocates. We have child care providers. We have legislative staff and some legislators. Board Supervisor President Linda Seifert is here. Supervisor Aaron Hannigan's here. We have the County Office of Education Superintendent Jay Speck. We have nonprofits. So we did a really good job, I think, reaching out to different parts of the community to come together and focus on what really is going to be our children's agenda moving forward.
So all these things contribute to having a healthy, stable family.
We wanted to give some background information for our stakeholders before they voted on top priorities. So we started out with two representatives from statewide advocacy groups. One is the California Budget Project, and then Children Now. And they talked about what's going on the state level regarding children, youth, and families.
We've got a lot of people hurting in California, still struggling to make ends meet. These are our poverty numbers according to most recent poverty levels, where we've got more than 1 in 7 Californians living below the federal poverty line, and that's 1 in 5 children. Folks at the Public Policy Institute of California at Stanford have collaborated to produce a California public poverty measure that actually includes costs of living in California, particularly housing. And both of these numbers actually go up pretty dramatically if you actually include our costs.
If you've heard my boss, Ted Lempert, speak, you know that he's very passionate about giving more power to children's advocacy. And what we're doing right now is trying to harness that public support. I don't think you hear any candidate or really any person saying they don't support children's issues, and yet that doesn't translate into the support that's needed in the public policy arena.
And then after that, we heard from a pollster, Dave Metz, who's been working with a group of people to try to put a measure on the ballot in 2016 that will increase and provide sustainable services for children and youth for the next 5 to 10 years.
These are the kinds of revolutionary insights that you pay us pollsters for. People love kids. Not a big shocker, but the question is why? What are the things that make voters willing to open their wallets and make these investments when it comes to youth services in a way they may not be, for public safety, public health, transportation, other things that do matter to them? And the first thing I'd point out is kids matter more to voters. They see this as more of a priority than many other things that are competing for public dollars.
There are 8 issue summaries. And we have here today the authors of those 8 summaries. So what we've asked folks to do is to prepare a very brief presentation for you, and they're going to summarize some of the high points of each of these issues.
We sort of recognize people in poverty need food on a regular basis. So we're looking at Vallejo now to say where are there places that we have lots of people in poverty and not a lot of pantries and services.
More than 269,000 California public school students across the state, about 4% in California, of over the 6 million students in California public schools, have been identified as homeless. Close to 1,600 of those students reside in Solano County.
Our children are our future, and when you're looking at things like mental health and behavioral health and toxic stress and trauma, it's really important to realize that this insult to a child's brain development starts prenatally and on through childhood.
Some of the statistics and data you saw earlier have helped to share some of the story about child care in our county. Since 2007, we have lost approximately 23%, a quarter of our child care subsidies coming into Solano County.
Now the federal government says if they fund you and your community reaches a certain threshold for a particular language, then you need to provide services in that language. If you don't, you run the risk of losing federal funding, and Solano County is in that category.
So I'm here to talk to you about minimum wage, which you heard earlier from California Budget Project. And they shared a lot of really, I think, impactful data around what it really takes to make ends meet here in the Bay Area, which has a really high cost of living in comparison to the rest of the state and the rest of the country.
In the case of child abuse prevention and youth violence prevention, the stakes are much higher. The stakes are high, both the human cost and the economic cost to our communities are simply staggering.
So after the break, we're having people meet in small groups to really digest the 8 issues and look at the presentations and see if they have some questions, talk about, what they feel might be the top priorities. So it'll be a really good discussion, and there will be a report out on that.
Our county is becoming very adamant about cutting down on truancy. But then again, that affects directly our homeless population.
The other thing in here that we're not talking about is like assets. Do I have any savings? Do I have any security, personal security? So
you need a stable home. Without a stable home, you're not gonna, 9 times out of 10, you're not gonna feel safe.
In one of the earlier presentations, one of the first 3 presentations, one of the people that spoke said if you put 3 of the choices together into like one package, it would make a greater impact. And I thought once you look at these choices, it's actually pretty unfortunate that some of them are like basic needs of people. If you put all of those 3 together, I think it would make a bigger impact, because after that, you could add on to it even more with other options.
And then the last part of the day will be people walking around to look at the 8 issues that are posted on the walls, and then they ultimately will vote for their top 3 priorities. And at the end of the day, we'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about what the next steps are in terms of going with those priorities.
We had 2 that tied for the top position at 30 dots. That would be promoting safety to children of all ages, including gang prevention, child abuse prevention, and anti-bullying at 30. And restoring and expanding subsidized childcare and preschool that supports families at 30. Then we had 2 more that tied at 28. So we have 4 issues in our top tier. Those were identification and treatment of children's mental, behavioral, developmental health conditions, and increased funding for homeless youth.
My initial thinking on next steps is that we look at the 4 priorities. Those are going to be focused on in February, and try to align that with the polling results. And I think we'll get a lot of good support from our local elected representatives. I'm very energized about today, and it gives me more hope in terms of thinking and acting locally. I think we can do some real good in the short term and the long term. Okay, thank you very much for coming.